Welcome to Module 3. Great job learning this material. I hope you're finding it helpful. Our lives unfold not just as random sequences of events, but as stories with recognizable patterns. Narratives that give shape and meaning to our experiences. Many of these stories follow archetypal structures that have appeared throughout human history across vastly different cultures and eras. In our last video, we explored archetypal figures, the characters that populate our inner and outer worlds. Today, we'll examine the archetypal stories these characters enact, the narrative patterns that structure not just our myths and entertainment, but our personal psychological journeys. These aren't just stories we consume, they're stories we live, whether consciously or not. Archetypal narratives provide templates for how we understand life's transitions, challenges, and transformations. By becoming aware of these patterns, we gain perspective on our own life stories and greater choice in how we engage with them. Perhaps the most recognized archetypal narrative is what mythologist Joseph Campbell called the hero's journey or monomyth, a story pattern he found in myths and legends worldwide. While the specific details vary enormously, the underlying structure remains remarkably consistent. The hero leaves the ordinary world, ventures into a challenging unknown realm where they face tests and gain allies, confronts a supreme ordeal, and returns transformed, bearing something of value for themselves and their community. This isn't just an entertaining story structure, it represents the psychological process of growth and transformation. From a Jungian perspective, the hero's journey symbolizes the development and strengthening of the ego as it differentiates from its origins, faces challenges, and integrates new aspects of experience. The departure represents separation from the familiar and comfortable, whether literal or psychological. This might be leaving home for college, starting a new career, entering a relationship, or beginning therapy. Any situation that calls you beyond your established identity into a new territory. The challenges and tests represent the difficulties encountered in any significant growth process. These challenges aren't merely obstacles, but opportunities to develop new capacities and discover unexpected resources, both internal and external. The supreme ordeal often involves a symbolic death and rebirth, the surrender of an old identity to allow for the emergence of a new, more expanded self. This is the moment of greatest danger and greatest potential transformation. The return represents the integration of what has been gained through the journey. The hero doesn't remain in the special world, but brings its gift back to ordinary life, where they can benefit both the individual and the larger community. We see this pattern everywhere in culture, from ancient myths like the Odyssey to modern films like Star Wars, The Lion King, or Moana. But more importantly, we live this pattern in our lives, often without recognizing it. Think about major transitions in your life: leaving home, beginning a career, becoming a parent, facing a health crisis, or undertaking any significant challenge. These experiences often follow the hero's journey pattern, calling you beyond your comfort zone, testing your capacities, transforming your identity, and ultimately enriching your life and relationships. Another powerful archetypal narrative is the shadow confrontation, the story of meeting and integrating disowned aspects of oneself. This pattern appears in countless myths and stories where the protagonist must face a seemingly negative force that ultimately contains gifts or wisdom essential for their growth. In these stories, what initially appears as an adversary, a monster, antagonist, or feared aspect of reality ultimately reveals itself as a potential ally, once properly understood and integrated. The shadow figure often possesses qualities the hero lacks and needs to incorporate. Psychologically, this narrative represents the process of recognizing projections and reclaiming disowned aspects of the psyche. What we most fear or reject often contains vital energy and potential that, when integrated, leads to greater wholeness and authentic power. We see this pattern in Beauty and the Beast, where the feared creature contains the potential for love and transformation. We see it in countless stories where the villain and hero are revealed as two sides of the same coin, from Star Wars' Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader to Batman and his rogues gallery. In personal experience, shadow confrontation narratives often unfold when we face aspects of ourselves we've denied or rejected. The colleague who irritates you inexplicably might embody a quality you've disowned. The repeated conflict pattern in relationships might reflect an unacknowledged aspect of yourself seeking integration. When you find yourself with strong, seemingly irrational emotional reactions to situations or people, you may be living a shadow confrontation story. The question becomes whether you'll recognize the projection and reclaim what's yours, or continue externalizing this disowned aspect of yourself. The death and rebirth narrative represents perhaps the most profound transformation in human experience. This archetypal story appears in religious imagery worldwide, from Christ's crucifixion and resurrection to the Hindu god Shiva's cycle of destruction and creation, from the Egyptian Osiris myth to indigenous initiation rituals. Psychologically, this pattern represents the necessary deaths of outgrown aspects of identity to allow for new development. These aren't physical deaths, but psychological transformations where old self-definitions, beliefs, and patterns must be surrendered before new ones can emerge. The narrative typically involves 3 stages: separation, removal from ordinary identity; liminality, a threshold state between identities often experienced as disorientation or emptiness; and reincorporation, return with a new, expanded identity. We experience many such symbolic deaths and rebirths throughout life. The adolescent must die to childhood to be reborn as an adult. The single person must die to autonomous identity to be reborn in partnership. The adult in midlife may experience the death of youth-centered identity to be reborn into a wisdom-oriented phase. These transitions are rarely smooth or painless. Like their mythic counterparts, psychological death rebirth experiences often involve disorientation, grief for what's being lost, and fear of the unknown. Yet they contain the seeds of profound renewal and expanded consciousness. When you find yourself in periods of confusion, loss of meaning, or dissolution of familiar identity, you may be living a death rebirth narrative. Rather than trying to cling to the dissolving form, Jungian psychology suggests consciously participating in the transformation, trusting the process that's unfolding, even when its ultimate shape isn't yet clear. The Trickster Transformation represents yet another archetypal narrative pattern. In mythology worldwide, trickster figures like Native American Coyote, Norse Loki, Greek Hermes, or African Anansi create change through disruption, often breaking rules and boundaries to introduce new possibilities. Psychologically, trickster narratives represent the process of overturning rigid structures when they've become too limiting. The trickster embodies the principle that sometimes systems need to be disrupted before new growth can occur. Trickster energy is neither simply destructive nor constructive, but transformative. It operates at boundaries, thresholds, and crossroads, creating breakthrough by breaking through established patterns. We see trickster narratives in countless cultural expressions, from Bugs Bunny outwitting Elmer Fudd, to Shakespeare's fools who speak truth to power, from con artist films to corporate disruptive stories like those of Steve Jobs or Elon Musk. In personal experience, trickster narratives often emerge when established patterns have become too rigid or limiting. The unexpected job loss that leads to a more fulfilling career. The relationship breakup that precedes deeper love. The illness that prompts reevaluation of priorities. These apparent misfortunes sometimes function as trickster energies, breaking down what needs to end so something new can begin. When your life seems to be falling apart in ways that ultimately lead to positive transformation, you may be living a trickster narrative. The challenge is to maintain your sense of humor and openness to unexpected possibilities, even amid apparent chaos. The divine marriage represents an archetypal narrative of integration between complementary forces, often symbolized as masculine and feminine energies. In mythology, this appears as the sacred wedding, or hieroskamos, the union of God and goddess, sky and earth, spirit and matter. Psychologically, this narrative represents the integration of complementary aspects within the psyche. For Jung, this often meant the union of anima and animus, or more broadly, the conscious and unconscious aspects of the personality. The divine marriage story isn't primarily about external relationships, though it may be projected onto them. It's about inner wholeness, the reconciliation of seemingly opposed qualities within oneself, reason and emotion, structure and flow, assertion and receptivity, independence and connection. We see this pattern in fairy tales, where the union of prince and princess represents psychological wholeness. We see it in ancient religious imagery of sacred marriage as the template for cosmic harmony. We see it in modern films where complementary characters ultimately recognize their interconnection and become stronger together. In personal experience, the divine marriage narrative often unfolds as we work to integrate aspects of ourselves that seem in conflict. The corporate leader learning to incorporate emotional intelligence. The artist developing structural discipline. The caregiver who learns to receive care. All are living versions of this integration story. When you're working to reconcile seemingly opposed aspects of yourself, you're engaging with the divine marriage narrative. This isn't about eliminating differences, but bringing them into right relationship, allowing their creative tension to generate new possibilities. These archetypal narratives, the hero's journey, shadow confrontation, death and rebirth, Trickster Transformation, and divine marriage, aren't separate stories, but interconnected aspects of the lifelong individuation process. Different narratives may be more prominent at different times in your life, or you might be living multiple storylines simultaneously. How can you recognize which archetypal stories are active in your life? Pay attention to reoccurring patterns, emotional resonance with certain stories, dreams that follow particular narrative structures, and the metaphors you naturally use to describe your experience. The value in recognizing these patterns isn't to categorize your experience simplistically, but to gain perspective and a sense of meaning even in difficult transitions. When you understand that your current challenge is part of the hero's journey or death rebirth process, it can provide context and direction that helps you engage more consciously with the process. In our next module, we'll explore how these archetypal patterns manifest in our emotional lives through complexes, those charged clusters of feelings, memory, and perception that can so powerfully influence our behavior and relationships. For now, I invite you to reflect. Which archetypal narratives feel most alive in your current life situation? How might recognizing these patterns help you engage more consciously with your own story? What might change if you saw your challenges not as random difficulties, but as meaningful chapters in an archetypal narrative of transformation? Remember that becoming aware of these patterns doesn't diminish their power, but allows you to participate more consciously in their unfolding, bringing greater intention and creativity to your own life. Okay, bye for now. See you in the next video.